Ça, comment je peux... Voilà, maintenant c'est mieux.
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Allow us to wait for 5 additional minutes to before starting. And we could resume with the opening remarks from Madame Leila Ben Ali. Thereafter, we are going to have a representative from Statistics Sweden, Mr. Frederick Boot. And also we will have with us today Dr. Frank Klagsgaard from the Global Migration Data Analysis Center. Thank you once again for being with us today, and speak to you again in 4 minutes. Thank you very much for your patience.
Yes, it's here. Can we start? Now is it okay? No? Now it's okay.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Leila. So we could start just to share some information with all the participants. Mrs. Leila will be starting with the opening remarks, and Mr. Brian will carry on moderating and taking it off from now. Thank you very much, and all the best to all of you. Mrs. Leila, over to you. Mrs. Leila, we can't hear you. Could you please unmute your mic? Mrs. Leila. Mrs. Leila, could you please start? I don't know if you can hear us.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, all colleagues. Thank you for joining us for this online, this second edition of the online Africa School on Migration Statistics. Before we begin, I just want to welcome you all and appreciate you for the commitment that you've done to join this second edition of the online school. And it's a great pleasure to have you amongst us. And before we begin, we want to have the opening remarks from our speakers. And The first speaker for this session today will be Madam Leila Ben Ali. She is the head of Statistics Division, Africa Union Commission. Madam Leila, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Dr. Frank Laxko, Director of IOM Global Migration Data Analysis Center, GMDAC, co-chair of the UN Expert Group on Migration Statistics, Mr. Stefan Andersson, head of the International Cooperation Office, Statistics Sweden, experts on migration statistics from National Office, fellows, colleagues from African Statistics System, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the African Union Commission, African Union Institute for Statistics, and indeed on my own behalf, I wish to welcome all of you to this second virtual African online course on migration statistics. This course is a joint initiative of the African Union Commission, the IOM GMDAC, and Statistics Sweden as part of their partnership to contribute on building capacity of the EU member states on migration statistics development and to address the urgent need for harmonized, timely, and quality migration data to inform policymakers and the integration of migration in development and protection strategies at national, regional, and continental level. The aim of this course is to strengthen national capacities for collecting, producing, and disseminating migration data across countries in Africa, with the adoption of the revised strategy for the harmonization of statistics in Africa, SHASA2, to ensure proper development and harmonization of statistics in Africa. The African Union Commission, through the African Union Institute for Statistics, StatAfrique, is strengthening the capacities of national statistical systems for the production of quality statistics according to African and international standards for the production of statistics. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned in the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, Africa believes that strengthening migration statistics and data will not only enhance migration policy development and implementation in the continent. As you are aware, two political instruments adopted by the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the African Union govern the management of migration in Africa. This is the EU Revised Migration Policy Framework with its plan of action, and also the joint EU-ILO, IOM, ECE Labor Migration Program in Africa. The adopted migration policy framework for Africa identifies migration data and statistics as key pillars in improving migration governance in the continent. In this regard, the Commission had planned to support EU member states and RECs through necessary capacity building initiatives and establishment of necessary institutions in the continent to strengthen collection, utilization, and dissemination of relevant migration data and statistics in Africa. These various statistics must be produced as part of the implementation of the strategy for the harmonization of statistics in Africa, SHASA2. The results of the two editions of the African Labor Migration Statistics reports show in recent years that African Union member states have made commendable efforts in producing statistics on migration in Africa. Nevertheless, there is still effort to be done to fill the gap in the production of quality statistics on migration in Africa. The African Union Commission had initiated a vast capacity building program for national actors responsible for the production of migration statistics. This how the African Union Commission, in collaboration with strategic partners, as I mentioned, IOM GIMDAC and Statistics Sweden, organize training sessions to strengthen the national migration statistician and expert in migration statistics. Thus, in the framework of improving the quality of statistics on migration in Africa, and given the resounding successes of the first edition of the course organized in December 2020, Statafrique, IOM GIMDAC, and Statistics Sweden are organizing this second online course on migration. The objective of this course is to strengthen the capacity at of national statistical systems for the production of quality statistics on migration. The second online school will focus on the main themes as follow: best practices for population and housing censuses, statistics on shelters and internally displaced people, methods for estimating missing data on migration, new ILO standards and methodology on labor migration, and statistics on migrant children and also gender statistics. During these 3 days training, the actors of national statistical systems will be equipped with new processing technique on migration statistics and relevant domains. I would like to urge all participants to pay very close attention to this training or course. The Commission now had the ambition to organize quarterly online schools on migration, and also is considering developing online training modules on migration statistics. I wish to reiterate African will continue priorities in migration governance in the continent. I am looking forward to having successful deliberation and wish to reiterate the Commission's willingness to support the future edition of online school on migration statistics. I thank you for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Leila, for your opening remarks. Indeed, it's really a wonderful opportunity to have the participants and all the panelists here to have opportunity to participate in this second edition of the online school. Now, our second speaker to give the opening remarks is Mr. Stefan Anderson. He's the head of international cooperation.
It's not there.
Oh, sorry. Frederick. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. Our second speaker for the session that is on the opening remarks will be Mr. Frederick. Mr. Frederick from Statistics Sweden. Please, you have the floor, Mr. Frederick. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Distinguished representatives from the African Union, UN agencies, regional economic communities, and national statistical offices, ladies and gentlemen, dear statisticians. There is an individual story behind every migrant, and many reasons why African children, women, and men might seek to move away somewhere different from where they were born and raised. There is a strong emphasis on the individual in Agenda 2030, as expressed in the Leave No One Behind principle. Out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 10 contain targets and indicators that are related to migration or mobility. In this regard, SDG target 10.7 says, facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people, including through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. In addition, SDG target 17.18 tells us to enhance capacity development support to developing countries to increase significantly the availability of high quality, timely, and reliable data disaggregated by income, gender, age, race, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, geographic location, and other characteristics relevant in the national context. Dear statisticians, Statistics Sweden has been engaged as a development partner through the world for 40 years. We do capacity development by working together as peers. We apply a peer-to-peer model for capacity development, where statistical colleagues work together and jointly develop capacity. The online African School on Migration Statistics is an example of our ambition to facilitate capacity development and increase the knowledge of better practices in the production of migration statistics. The support to improved statistical capacity is part of Sweden's work globally because reliable and up-to-date statistics is paramount to ensure a world where everyone counts and no one is left behind. Going back to Goal 17, other than explicitly pointing to migratory status as a key characteristic in the description of a country's population, Goal 17 urges us all to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. In the spirit of Goal 17, Statistics Sweden, together with the African Union, regional economic communities, national statistical offices, and other institutions on the African continent, have joined hands in a partnership to improve migration statistics in Africa. The joint program is funded by the government of Sweden through the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. A common goal of this joint program is to make sure that timely and accurate migration statistics are produced and harmonized so they can be compared over time across states. This goal is aligned with the second strategy for the African Union's harmonization of statistics in Africa, SHASA 2. An additional goal is to make the data available to users, be it journalists, researchers, civil society, the general public, or governments and decision makers. This is in line with Statistics Sweden's vision. We provide society with reliable statistics that can be trusted. The value of African migration statistics lie in its use for crafting planned and well-managed migration policies to the betterment of children, women, and men. The value of African migration statistics lie in its use for monitoring SDG target 10.7, facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people, including through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies for children, women, and men. Dear statisticians, we want to support and encourage you in your efforts in the production and dissemination of relevant migration statistics that can be trusted. Knowledge exchange and experience sharing within the African statistical community should be strengthened and supported. In order to be relevant to our audience, the content of the online school was chosen based on the current needs of member states, as expressed in a survey. Hence, the program is centered around 3 topics. Day 1, population and household censuses. This covers topics such as good examples on including items related to migration in regular censuses, as well as how to formulate items to identify refugees and internally displaced persons. Day 2, estimation methods and levels of disaggregation. Here you will be presented with common situations where there are data gaps in time series and examples on how to deal with it. Tomorrow will also be about different ways to disseminate results to make sure that vulnerable groups are not hidden in the data. We must make sure not to leave anyone behind. Day 3, the last day for this time, labor migration statistics, children and gender issues. We will hear about the new deliberations from the International Labour Organization when it comes to indicators to measure labor migration. After that, we will hear experts from the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund put migration into the child perspective. Last, the focus will shift to the issue on gender and migration statistics. Dear statisticians, as representative of the International Cooperation Office at Statistics Sweden, I'm proud to welcome you to our second African School on Migration Statistics. As previously, this event is organized together with the African Union Commission Division for Statistics, DataAfrique, and the International Organization for Migration, IOM. Our joint contribution is through high quality, relevant, and timely statistics where everybody counts and no one is left behind. Dear statisticians, I would like to extend my thanks to all the participants and the organizers of the online school on migration statistics. Together, you will make this online school a success. Now is the time for migration statistics in action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Frederick, for those wonderful opening remarks. Now we're gonna have our third speaker, our third and last speaker for the opening remarks. That's Mr. Frank. Frank is the director, IOM, the IOM's Global Migration Data Analysis Center, and also is the co-chair of the UN Expert Group on Migration Statistics. Mr. Frank, welcome.
Thank you very much. And like the previous speakers, it's a great honor to be involved in this second online African School on Migration Statistics. We're delighted to partner with the African Union and Statistics Sweden, and with our many colleagues of also across Africa. IOM has 4 regional offices across Africa and is represented in most countries in Africa. And in our day-to-day work, we are constantly collecting, using, analyzing, presenting statistics and data on migration. Our organization recently launched its own migration data strategy, and it is a key part of IOM's overall strategic vision to improve data on migration. And as you all know, next year, countries around the world will be reviewing progress with respect to the implementation of the Global Compact on migration. And we have an African regional review, I think, coming up in July. And of course, the first objective, as you all know, of the GCM is to improve data and statistics on migration. So today's event and the next 3 days are extremely timely. We are delighted not only to support this event virtually, but we have also placed one of our staff members, Kenza Agad, on secondment to the DataAfrique office in Tunis this year, and she has been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure that everything runs very smoothly over the next few days, and as I understand, has been in touch with all of you ahead of this meeting. Maybe just a word on how we select these topics, picking up on what the last speaker said. I mean, it is quite difficult in the space of 3 days to cover all the important topics relating to migration data and statistics. And so what we try to do is at least try and find out what it is that you want to learn about. And I think we have come up with a very interesting selection of topics, which our previous speaker outlined a moment ago. Not only do we have an interesting set of topics, but I think we are also able, in relation to these topics, to present some of the latest evidence and guidance on these issues. For example, the last speaker talked a great deal about ensuring that no migrant is left behind. Well, very recently in the last few weeks, with the support of Statistics Sweden and SIDA in Sweden, we were able to issue an extensive guide on how to disaggregate SDG indicators by migratory status. And you will be hearing from one of my colleagues, Elisa Mosler-Vidal, about that new report during the course of this training. So that's very fresh information. We will also be presenting a new guide, which has yet to be released, on gender and migration statistics, also prepared by some of my colleagues at GIMDAC in Berlin, working also with a consultant based in Canada. And so again, this is very fresh information. In addition, I want to flag the importance of the new UN recommendations on migration statistics, which were only released in March of this year at the UN Statistical Commission. And fortunately, you will be hearing from the co-chair of the UN Expert Group on Migration Statistics, Mr. Diego Iturralde, later today. You'll hear more about those new recommendations. This is a very important development because the last time that the UN system revised these recommendations was back in 1998, and the world has changed quite considerably since then. And one of the questions moving forward will be, how are we going to implement these recommendations? So it's important to have events like today and tomorrow and the following day to be able to engage with the potential users of these new UN recommendations to discuss how we can, in practical terms, make use of these recommendations and work together to improve the collection, sharing, analysis, and analysis of data on migration. So finally, I don't have time to mention all the other work that we're doing in Africa with the African Union, but I want to underline the fact that this training initiative is part of a wider program of work, which comes under the heading of the Africa Migration Data Network. This is a new network that was launched earlier this year in partnership with the AU, Statistics Sweden, and the OECD, both the development and migration branches of the OECD. It brings together currently 53 countries in Africa. We have established their migration focal points in all of those countries, mainly in national statistical offices. And this training course is one of the activities of that network, and we're planning another course, I believe, later this year within the framework of that network. So just wanted to mention that. And perhaps one last word from me. At the end of the course, we would very much like to hear your feedback because we want to continually improve how we organize, design, present these courses, how we make available information. I should just finally mention that if you are looking for resources and guidance, you can always turn to IOM's Global Migration Data Portal, where we have a dedicated capacity building section. We also have regional pages focusing on different regions of Africa. And there is a wealth of information there, which I think will be useful for your work as well. So I'd like to end there, and I wish you great success during the next few days. And thank you for this opportunity to open this training school.
Thank you so much, Frank, for your opening remarks. And I'd like also to appreciate our three speakers who gave very wonderful opening remarks, and they were very timely because even despite the fact that we started a little bit late, they have kept their time. Now, we are going to have one session this afternoon and morning also, depending on where you are. So in our session one, we are going to look at population and household censuses. We'll have two speakers. The first speaker will teach us and inform us and give us more information about population and household census with good and examples and good practices. And then after that, we'll have a break of about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we'll have our second session, that is on module 2, on standardizing the questions for identifying refugees and IDPs. So our first speaker for today, for today's session will be Mr. Diego Iturralde. He's the Chief Director, Demography Statistics South Africa. So Mr. Diego, I don't know whether you are present.
I am present. I am present.
Okay,
good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, Diego. You have the floor. You have 40 minutes. Thank you.
I'm just sharing the screen here. Okay. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this session and to the second African School on Migration Statistics. It's a pleasure to be with you, having addressed the school in December last year when we had the first African School. I think at that occasion, we had a discussion on the new conceptual framework, which was subsequently presented to the UN Statistics Commission in March, which Frank made reference to. And there has been a lot of demand for more information around that. And so yesterday I had an equal pleasure to address the IGAD region at a workshop that they were hosting, and we spoke about the conceptual framework there as well. So of course, this is only part of the work that the expert group on international migration statistics is involved in. And I think as time goes by, more work and more outputs from the expert group will be shared with yourselves. For today, we would like to speak about a very important input with regards to migration statistics, and that would be on the population and housing census. As we all know, the population and housing census is one of the key and probably one of the most important sources of migration statistics that we are able to rely on. I think many countries have been doing censuses for many, many years. And as far as the 2020 round is concerned, some of us may have already done our census. Other countries on the African continent, including my own country, South Africa, is due to do its census in the next, 8 months' time. We will actually be going to the field next month for the pilot, and South Africa will do its census in February of next year. So there are some documents that guide us in terms of how population census should take place. Firstly, we have the principles and recommendations on population and housing census, the recommendation on statistics on international migration, which is being reviewed by the expert group, as well as the handbook on the use of population census for international migration statistics. The most important one in terms of census here is the first one, which was most recently reviewed in 2018 and includes some very key recommendations which find themselves in the conceptual framework that we presented last year. In terms of data collection and capacity building, the United Nations Demographic Yearbook has been collecting information coming from censuses and other sources of official statistics since 1948. And this is updated at a regional and country level. I must at this point just pause and just indicate that I need to recognize the UN Statistics Division for assistance with parts of this presentation. This presentation was in the main part developed by themselves, and I have modified it in order to make it more relevant to challenges on the African continent. So I just wanted to put that out there. So why should we invest so much in census, and why is it important for us to take heed of examples of good practice when it comes to census? Firstly, census responds very directly to policy needs. It's the power of information that the census has at very small areas, which allows us to respond to and address such policy needs. Census is important in international migration in that it ensures that we have better coverage of migrants in the country concerned, that we understand how many there are, or where they are, and what characteristics they have, and what are the main reasons why they find themselves in a particular country. Census is also important in terms of trying to phrase our questions in a better way that makes it more understandable and more relevant to those policy needs. So what exactly are those data needs that we require? So starting from the top right, I think the most important here is what are the types of migration that we're involved with. When we talk of international migration, we can talk about forced migration, asylum seekers, documented or undocumented stateless persons, or a wide variety of migrants, some of which can be covered through a census and others which cannot. Then we want to know who are the migrants that we are measuring. What is their age profile, their sex distribution, if there are any subdivisions in the population, what population groups would they belong to, the socioeconomic status, levels of education, employment, which is obviously linked to skills. All of these are characteristics that policymakers want to know about and need to know about. Very importantly, then, we want to know the periodicity of the movement of such migrants. We can look at things using lifetime migration in terms of stocks. It would be an aggregate measure of migrants in a particular territory, or we can look at migration flows, which look at the inflows and outflows over a specific period in time, and which would tell the policymaker about certain trends that may occur at one point in time, which are different from a separate point in time. There are also some substantive issues related to migration, which may directly or indirectly tell us more about the migrants. Possibly in this day and age, exposure to COVID-19 may be a very strong reason why we find a slowdown in migration in some parts of the continent and of the world. Health status, unaccompanied migrants, remittances, policies and governance missing migrants, and integration of migrants are all important parts of understanding the realm of migration. We'd also like to know about how do migrants move into a particular territory, what mode of transport we used, possibly not of application to a population census. Trafficking and smuggling is, of course, a very important phenomenon to understand and to have a handle on, as well as of accompanied minors. We'd like to know what the mode of movement for them was. Then, of course, finally coming to the question that most people in the public space would want to know is how many. The narrative around migration is always based around how many migrants are we having. That's the first question that is asked, and thereafter we would then need to answer other questions regarding their various characteristics. So some of the questions that we would want to know, or some of the answers to the following questions are the ones that we would have to know, is around who are the immigrants, where are they from, how long have they been here, what are their skill levels, are they employed or unemployed, what kind of work do they do, etc. And when it comes to immigrants, which is also a theme that we find in some population censuses, not all, we have similar questions to ask. We would like to know the profile of people who are leaving. When did they leave? What are their skill levels? What is the reason why they've left, and so on. This slide here, we are able to see by having a look at the migration data from 33 OECD countries what the age structure looks like for migrant populations versus non-migrant populations. So census is able to indicate to us that migrant populations are usually a lot younger. They're in their working ages, and they decline as one becomes older. So this is part of the information, or part of the evidence that we are able to receive from a population census. Something else that we can look at here is to what extent are migrants more or less employed than non-migrants. If we have a look at the bottom line, that line represents an equal level of employment for migrants and non-migrants, and the upper diagonal line indicates that the rate of employment for migrants is twice as high as that for natives. And so we can see that many countries fall in between the two lines, with some outliers below the first and above the second line. And so it's important to understand those differences and those dynamics that are at play. So what kind of data can census produce? So we can receive what we refer to as stocks. Those are stocks of foreign-born, of foreigners, of returned migrants. In some cases, by asking the right questions, of second-generation migrants as well. And in a case like that, it is interesting, particularly where there's a lot of return migration. It is interesting to look at second-generation migrants to see what are the developmental outcomes that differ between first and second-generation migrants. And we can look at stock of immigrants where immigration questions are asked as well. Census can also indicate to us the socioeconomic situation and the geographic location of immigrants. Very often we will say that there are so many Chinese people living in the United States, for example, but it may be that they're not spread all over the United States. They may be located in one particular part of the United States, and they may be originating from a specific part of China. And I think the same thing is something that we can see on the African continent, where migration numbers are quite high between one country and the other. We could also have a look at intercensal net migration, provided questions are asked in a similar manner between one census and the other, and they are measuring things equally without any bias at one census versus the other. In intercensal net migration is something we can calculate. And of course, we can look at some indications of recent migration flows. If we are in a position, and we should be in a position to ask about recent migration flows, movement since the last census, for example, if that question is inserted into a census and asked, we can look at how has migration taken place over the last 10 years and compare that to the overall aggregate picture of migration that exists in the country, and perhaps focus on specific streams. Which streams happen to be prevalent now, whether it be in terms of international migration or internal migration? Do we still find a preponderance of Southern Africans migrating to South Africa, or are we seeing other streams that would seem to be emanating much more strongly in the last 10 years as opposed to at a previous point in time? In terms of advantages of census on international migration, it would be the availability. Almost all countries are committed to conducting a census every 10 years. I think there are a few countries on the African continent which have not been able to produce censuses as a result of instability in the country. But I would say that the overwhelming majority of countries have conducted a census on the 2010 round of censuses and are on track, albeit with some delays related to COVID, to conduct their census for the 2020 round. There's a high level of comparability thanks to the guidelines that we receive from the United Nations and efforts like the efforts through the African Union to strengthen the production of migration statistics. We are able to have a consistent set of questions between one census and the other, and so comparability is quite feasible. The coverage of the census means that everybody is counted, and that there is no requirement to prove any migration status or any other form of administrative documentation in the process of being counted. I often get asked the question, why do we not ask people for proof of where they were born or proof of somebody being a taxpayer or something like that? And a census will not be the success that it is if it becomes conditional on something happening before the time. So the idea behind the census, or the objective of a census, is to make sure that every person in a country is counted on census day. And issues of law enforcement or issues of adherence to certain dictates in the country concerned need to be the mandate of the body responsible for that. And of course, the other advantage of a census, it contains a wealth of information. The socioeconomic variables, the geographic location, and especially the small area geographic location is what sets a census apart from any other data source. Of course, there are some disadvantages, and that would be that the census is very infrequent. It would be highly impossible for us to do a census every year or every 2 years. I can think back to South Africa was at one point doing a census every 5 years. So its first census as a democratic country was in '96, and that was followed up by a census in 2001. And no sooner had one census finished than the planning for the next census would begin. So it would be a continuous rolling of working on census, which many countries would not have the infrastructure or the resources to do a census every 5 years. Subsequently, we have moved to every 10 years. Then the census also cannot have a look at migration history and look at different types of mobility. Once again, it would render the census less accurate if we asked if a person was a refugee or an asylum seeker and ask for evidence of that. There should be other proxy measures of identifying refugees or asylum seekers, but of course we can very clearly imagine that asking somebody for evidence of something or the other will not render them to want to participate in the census, and they will try and avoid any enumerator when they see the enumerator in the area. The census can also not look at causes or consequences of international migration. It can certainly ask questions on reasons why a person migrated, but certainly not make any inference on the causes or consequences. I think the research community has done and is doing a lot of good work in looking at these particular factors. And then, of course, issues such as decent work, social protection floor, or pension portability are more closely belonging in a specific survey, whether it be a migration survey or whether it be a labor market survey, where these kind of questions would belong. A census really cannot ask every question imaginable and conceivable. And so I think if there's one advice that I would give at this point in time, it would be to ensure that there is a consultation process that identifies what are the questions that you want to insert in a census and what questions can you insert in surveys which may occur more regularly. And I think the guiding question here should always be, do I need this information at a small area? If your answer to that is a resounding yes, then I would say include it in your census. If it's not important to have it at a small area, but you're happy to have it at the first or second administrative level of your country, then I would recommend that it be placed in a survey. And of course, if you have administrative sources that can inform you of what you want to insert in a census, and your administrative source is fairly complete, of the data is of high quality and is being used regularly, then I would certainly rely on that as well. So in the running of a census, there are various phases which I want to highlight here. From the initial planning phase, and I think the first question that we have there is probably the most important question, that is, who do we include in the census count? Who do we count? And who do we decide to exclude, if anyone at all? We then can talk about the preparation stage. This would be communication, training of interviewers, highlighting the confidentiality issues, the questionnaire preparation, the consultation, which I referred to, translation of questionnaires for countries that have more than one official language. And I think in this day and age, where most of us are moving away from paper-based questionnaires to electronic questionnaires, the development of questions in such a way that they are compatible with electronic systems that can collect information over the web, or where questions can be asked over the phone. It's important that the questions be prepared and phrased in such a way. There should be an emphasis on an enumeration plan. How will we be enumerating? What we are seeing around the world right now for those countries doing census is that people living in well-off neighborhoods with reliable internet connectivity would prefer to do that on their own. In other words, self-enumeration over the web. But that you may find that people in rural areas with less reliable internet connectivity would prefer a face-to-face. With regards to using the phone, well, with a census being quite long, I think that there are very few people who would have the patience to sit on the phone for 45 minutes and to answer questions that the census taker would like. Then I think reaching out to special population groups, I will speak to that a little bit in one of the next slides, but we're talking here about military personnel, perhaps working in another country, maybe students who are living away from home. How would you handle them? And then finally, and probably on the African continent, one of the most under prioritized phases of census preparation would be dissemination. The segregation of the data at smaller areas is really important, because that's really part of the whole point of a census, of being able to provide statistics at small areas, providing metadata, explaining how each variable is measured and what the different categories of answers mean, and then making data accessible. I can't stress this enough, that there was at one point a initiative at the University of Pennsylvania that was archiving African censuses, and it is almost ridiculous that for somebody who wants to get access to an African census, one would need to go to the ACAP unit at the University of Pennsylvania, or to the IPUMS microdata facility, which produces microdata, that means a sample of the census, at the University of Minnesota. I think that's in this day and age, there are enough very affordable digital means through which to disseminate information that should enable all of us to be able to disseminate census data and take ownership of our own censuses. So I think the first question I ask is who is included? We have two main kinds of count. We refer to firstly the de facto population. So that is where you are, where I find you. I come and knock on your door and I find you at a particular house. That is the de facto. And the de jure refers to where is it that you usually reside. We all know from the conceptual framework and from the census recommendations that there is the threshold of either 6 months or 12 months of somebody of you being a resident at the place where you are for at least 6 months or 12 months, whichever you choose, with the exception of movements for vacations or for work assignments. The South African census uses a combination of both de facto and de jure, and is actually able to make the distinction between the two at the end of the census. One also needs to make a decision on how to treat special population groups. I've mentioned the issue of military personnel who may be stationed outside the country. Should they be counted as citizens of your own country, or should they be excluded since they are outside the country? That's a decision for each country to make. Foreign citizens abroad, they can be counted if we have an immigration module, and I will speak a little bit on immigration. But would there be a mechanism through which foreign citizens can be identified? What about those students who are away from home, or people who live in multiple homes at different times of the year? An interesting case was with the US Census last year, where just as lockdown was the beginning, the census in the US was also beginning, and it needed to be stopped at a particular point in time. As a result of lockdown, many students went back home, and the question was then, where should students be counted when the census resumes? Where should they be counted? Should they be counted at home where they are now staying, and whether they are attending university remotely, or should they be counted in the place where they would have been staying? Because the consequences either way are extremely important. If the decision was not taken to instruct students to be counted where they would usually have been, you would have had a census with university towns that would be completely empty. And of course, then the resources allocated to those towns for the next 10 years would have been minimal. So those are important decisions that one needs to take into account. If we have a look at the census enumeration approach, we can see that even at a regional level, not all countries followed the same enumeration approach. In Africa, out of 28 countries, 14 used the usual resident, 22 the population present, and there were other countries that required a legal or a permanent address. In terms of communication and publicity, this is really important in terms of ensuring that, as we say here, we are separating census enumeration from immigration authorities, that you make clear that the information is being collected for statistical purposes, that information about a particular individual is not going to be passed on to immigration authorities or to any law enforcement agency. And as a matter of fact, the only information that will be shared with such agencies is the same information that will be shared with anyone else. It will be aggregated at an acceptable level where confidentiality is assured. And this hopefully will bring confidence to such groups, in particular migrant groups, that they will not be persecuted with census data as a result of participating. And of course, covering different languages. A country like South Africa has 11 official languages, and so the census questionnaire, although it's developed in English, becomes translated into all the other 11 languages, and then gets reverse translated back into English to make sure that the translation has the same meaning that it had intended in its original English version. Then in terms of training of interviewers, I think this is a really important part of the census, because very often at the end of the census, we take a look back at what worked and what didn't work. And 75% of the lessons that we want to teach ourselves always say, we should have trained this better, or we could have trained this like that. It's sometimes maybe a little bit unfair to blame a field worker for a lack of planning, but I think that the emphasis on training cannot be strong enough. So training field workers on how to ask the questions, how to probe for specific answers, understanding the rules of inclusion or exclusion, knowing what to do in migration-heavy areas where there may be some kind of a hesitance amongst migrants to participate, are all really important. And of course, the most important thing is to ensure that confidentiality will be maintained. Take advantage of any forum or of any network to speak out to members of a community, whether it's in your own neighborhood, whether you are able to address a much larger audience around the fact that the most important thing is the relationship between a statistics agency and the population. And that relationship cannot exist if there cannot be trust between each other with regards to confidentiality. The former statistician general of South Africa always said that trust is the conduit of statistics. When we're talking about questionnaire preparation, as I indicated before we need to have a conversation about the selection of topics to be included. So is there data available from other sources? For example, if we run a demographic and health survey, are there indicators there that are usable that we don't need to ask again in a census? What is the quality of data that we have seen in a census, either from previous census or from the testing of the census? Sometimes we may very much like to ask a question, but the quality of that information is extremely poor. An example in point here would be around the issue of maternal mortality, where we want to ascertain deaths to women as a result of an obstetric or a childbirth cause. And very often we get data on deaths of women from those causes, but also from many other causes. So the quality is not very strong, even though the need for the question is there. And we should realize that the asking of questions does not follow a one-size-fits-all approach. So what may happen in Algeria and what may work well in Algeria may not necessarily work well in Ethiopia or in Mozambique or any other such country on the continent. Always try to avoid technical terms such as migrant, immigrant, place of usual residence, and rather try and explain those words in terms of what they really mean. So let's rather talk about foreign-born person, because that explains it a little bit more strongly. A foreign-born person, although as migration specialists, we all know that not everyone who is foreign-born may be a migrant, because they need to meet that 6 or 12 months threshold. But we can ask that other question on the 6 or 12 months threshold to then distinguish migrants from simply people who are mobile. With regards to the use of pre-coded response categories, always I think here we should always include a other category, but make sure that all the other options are as complete as which they can be. And we should also try and, as we've indicated before, by translating the questionnaires, provide the questionnaire in various languages. So the enumeration can take place in person or self-enumerated. We can have a situation whereby the homeless people are enumerated at a central point, like in a park or something like that. But we need to take account of hard to count areas, maybe high-walled residential areas or private neighborhoods are usually very difficult to count, but also areas where there are high levels of crime will also be equally hard to count. And then, of course, we need to take into account new methods of enumeration. As I indicated, the web-based enumeration and the telephonic enumeration are new methods that are being used around the world. And of course, that means that these users need to register themselves before to indicate that they will enumerate themselves in this manner, so that double counting does not occur, that a person is not enumerated on the web and then also face-to-face. But that the face-to-face should be a last resort for people who are unable to use the other methods, or where their enumeration has been incomplete, or where there is information that is lacking. With regards to something like multi-layered tabulation, a labor force survey, for example, would not really be able to indicate a labor migrant, let's say from Zimbabwe, who is employed in the retail industry within a specific age group and sex, because the size of that sample would not enable that kind of tabulation to occur. So having either an electronic tool or predetermined tabulation plans, which, for example, here can indicate labor force participation of foreigners by citizenship and the duration of residence in the country, can be very useful. At Statistics South Africa, we use an electronic tool called Supercross, which enables this kind of tabulation to occur. And so the user is able to create tables according to the specifications that he or she needs. Migration, besides being a developmental phenomenon, is also a demographic phenomenon, I think, first and foremost. And age and sex are the most important facets for any demographer. So if I would recommend that two variables be prioritized above any others, it would be age and sex. If you can get age and sex correct in your census without any extreme level of misreporting, then I think you can already say that your census is a success. When disseminating, also always include documents around concepts, definitions, data coverage, etc. And data should be accessible for free, whether the census is funded by the fiscus of the country or through foreign donors. It should not be incumbent upon members of the public to pay for data of the census again. In South Africa, we took that approach in 1996, and it was just far harder to manage and administer the process of receiving payments and distributing the information by receiving payments than it was by making it freely available. So since 2001, the population census data in South Africa has always been available for free and is on the web as it is right now. Coming to some of the core topics that we should include in a census with regards to migration, the country of birth, country of citizenship. And I think with the issue of country of citizenship, I want to just pause here and indicate something. Whenever we talk about citizenship, I think many of us look to the census in the United States last year, and we think of how the Trump administration had tried to insert questions that were not tested. Now, if we look at the proposed questions, which was actually trying to identify undocumented migrants, that would be completely different from simply asking from which country are you a citizen of? So if it is a policy requirement, if it's going to be important for you to know of which country is a particular person a citizen of, then I think it's a fair question to ask. But if the way you word it is intended to identify which foreign persons have got permits to be here and which ones do not have permits to be here, then I think it's a misuse of the census as a means of trying to do the work of an immigration authority. The year or the period of arrival in the country is an important one. Most censuses always look at the last year of entry, and then in the preceding 10 years between the current census and the previous census, it would ask when in the last 10 years did you enter this country, if you indeed entered in the last 10 years. So this would obviously be for people born outside the country. It may also be of interest for return migration for citizens of your own country who are returning after having lived abroad. So as an example here, we ask, what is your place of birth? And for internal migration, we would refer to a district code or a town or a village or provinces, whatever the breakdown is. And for people from outside the country, we would mention the list of countries. Well, I would expect a far more complete or comprehensive list of countries than just these 5. So in terms of coding, there should be sufficient detail so that you know which option to select. And then any grouping of countries should only really be done at a processing stage. So we're not going to ask Western Europe or North America or North Africa. That we should really only do at the end when we are processing the data. And an important thing is to define countries according to their current border. So there may be border changes, international border changes. There may be some countries who secede from each other, like the South Sudan from Sudan, and that may have taken place in an intercensal period. But we make sure that whether it's internal boundaries or international boundaries, that we stick to a accepted definition of boundaries at a specific point in time. And speaking of boundaries, I think it's then also important from an internal migration point of view, or that at regular intervals that we update the boundaries of our censuses when the internal boundaries of the country are subjected to change. In South Africa, boundaries change, albeit very slightly every year. Main changes occur in an election year when electoral districts are declared. And then, of course, the census needs to be responsive to that. It needs to be able to reflect the current boundaries of the day. Not only the current census that you are working with, but all retrospective censuses before that need to be then realigned to the current boundaries or the newly changed boundaries. We should also be careful with data with lots of unknowns. In this table here, we are specifying native-born Italians or unknown, an unknown country of birth, which will result in data that's not particularly very useful. So here we're asking, were you born in this country or abroad? And then these do not know or not specified options can complicate issues. So my suggestion is ask questions as they are, and where an option or the available options do not are not applicable to you, we can either probe, or we can then, as a last resort, classify it as unknown in the processing stage. Then if we want to ask where a person was born, we can ask in a variety of manners. We can ask, where was this person born, or what was the usual place of residence of this person's mother when the person was born? And then we would ask various geographic information, either country, province, or municipality levels. An important thing is, in terms of coding, allow sufficient detail to be able to select a country and not use adjectives. So let's not refer to Ethiopian, Somalian, or Yemenite, but rather to the actual name of the country. Then, very importantly, I think we should also, when we ask citizenship, include a stateless option or without citizen in the encoded responses, because we know around the world and on the African continent, it's not any different, that statelessness is a serious concern, and it's something that, if we do not know the magnitude of it, and if we don't have a proper understanding of it, there's no way in which we can react to it. I think this is just a okay. Also, we should not in using adjectives like these adjectives that I refer to, that they may be confused with ethnicity. I think ethnicity is a totally different subject compared to citizenship. And if your country asks questions on ethnicity, it should rather be handled in a separate question. And then I mentioned the issue about statelessness. Then one of the other questions we should include is on the year or period of arrival into the country. And this is to distinguish between recent migrants and those who have been staying in the country for a long time. And can even be applied to return migration. So, for example, Jamaica will ask, what year did you or a particular person come to live in this country? Australia asking, which year did the person first arrive in this country to live here for at least a year or more? And in South Africa, we asked, which year did this person move to the country? And if you moved more than once, then we indicate the last year of move. With regards to return migration, and this can be linked to an immigration module, we would ask, the person ever lived outside the country for at least 12 months? When did the person last arrive in this country for 12 months or more, so that we know when did the return occur? In which country did the person live? If they're returning, where did they return from? So here's an example from the Indonesian census in 2015. Now, when collecting immigration data, South Africa does not collect immigration data in its census because very often when an entire family moves out or emigrates as a family, there's no one left behind to report their move. So this would really be applicable where there's only a household member who moves and somebody remains behind. And although we tested this in 2016, we found that those reporting a movement were certainly not representative of all people's movements outside the country. However, in the event that your country wants to insert an immigration module, it's important to indicate what is the time frame. So immigration, when is it in the last 5 years, last 10 years? Because if you make that period too long, you would include many people who may or may not still be alive, or people who may have emigrated and have already returned. We also should indicate that the person left for at least 6 months or a year, whichever of the two definitions you choose to use, because somebody could leave for 3 months to take up a work assignment somewhere and will then return. And of course, we wouldn't refer to that person as an immigrant as such. But having said that, some of the characteristics we will collect are on the age, sex, and marital status of immigrants, their age at immigration, their educational attainment, their occupation, the country they're immigrating to, as well as the reasons for immigration. So some examples, this is from Albania. Is any previous member of this household living abroad for 12 months or more? Algeria asks, are there persons who were members of the household who settled abroad, immigration, in the last 5 years? And this one, I'm not sure which country this is from, but it says, has any former member of this household been living continuously for 6 months or more outside the country? So there we can see different definitions that are being used. Here's some more examples, I think, from El Salvador, from Brazil, and from Nicaragua. Then much closer to home, from Ghana. So This should be asked for all household members of 15 years or older who have been living continuously for 6 months or more outside the country or intend to do so. And then the various questions would follow. In Belize, it will give an instruction. This section will collect basic information on persons who have moved abroad in the past 10 years. And the first question being asked here is, between the year 2000 and now, which was 2010, did anyone in your household move to live abroad and is still living there? In terms of collecting immigration through census, then we're saying be specific about the time period. Who are the immigrants? We're not going to get much information, particularly when an entire household has left the country, or where there's a recall issue. So even if there is someone left behind from the household, they may not remember where the household member has gone or when the person had left. And there could, of course, be duplicate reporting by multiple households. And always try, and if you are going to ask immigration in a census, always try and verify it against administrative sources or data from other censuses from other countries. The OECD in this regard is an extremely useful resource that collects migration data of all nations around the world who are residing in OECD countries, and so that's a useful resource to double check. Immigration cannot provide an accurate count of the number of immigrants, but we can certainly say something about the nature of immigration. We can talk about those who left the country in the last 5 years, those who are more likely to keep close ties with their country and family, and immigrants who are still in a registration system. If we have a registration system, it can be compared to that registration system. So I think from my side, I will end my presentation here. Suffice to say that for a statistical agency, most important output through which a statistical agency is measured, or through which its reputation is identified, is through its population census. So I think that this is a project through which we should not take any shortcuts, and we should put all efforts towards having a census that is able to reflect the nature of migration in our countries as best as possible, because this happens only once every 10 years and becomes the basis for a lot of other population-based initiatives in the next 10 years that will use the census data as a benchmark. So it's really important that as we conduct a census, we make sure that we get it as right as possible. So with that, thank you very much to the organizers. Thank you, Brian, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Diego, for the wonderful presentation that you've shared with us on population census, highlighting what type of data that is needed, various advantages, and various aspects that we need to consider, especially when we are doing the planning of the census and the type of data that we are collecting. Sorry, I allowed you to take so much time because of the rich knowledge that is contained with censuses and how we are using censuses to collect most of the information that we need. And we need our participants and also to get that insightful remarks. So I don't know, Kenza, whether we have any question for this, because we are almost running out of time.
Yes.
So maybe before we take a short break.
Yes, so I have a question for Diego. So there is a question from Mr. John Macauyel. who is asking what is the recommended time for immigration, 5, 10, or 15 years. There was also a comment from another participant, Mr. or Mrs. M. Komba, saying that my country is struggling with diaspora populations on the census. The inclusion or not is usually very political and also has resource challenges. Any comments? I could repeat the questions for you if you would like, Diego.
No, it's fine. I can see them on my screen.
Okay.
Right. I think with regards to immigration, I would first and foremost probably indicate that one should ask an immigration module with a lot of care and sensitivity. If your intention is to identify how many people of your nationality or of people who lived in the country have immigrated, then it's probably not the best source. But if it's in order to identify the brain drain or the profile of people who may have left, then by all means include it. But be assured that you're not going to get a representative response of immigrants. So like immigration that works on a census to census calendar, I would work on the 10 years. But any particular country may choose to make that longer or shorter, depending on their policy needs. With regards to diaspora populations on the census, yeah, this is a complex one because it is indeed political, and I think here the overall objective of a census should always be to try and count everybody and to make everybody comfortable and to ensure that that you have a count of people that is as complete as can be, and by assuring people that their participation is not linked to any law enforcement exercise, one would include them. Now, when we talk about diaspora populations in the true sense of the word, it would be nationals who are living in other countries. Would obviously be beyond the scope of a census because they are not residing in your own country at this point in time. So one would really need to rely on administrative processes or on the censuses of other countries to identify how many persons of your own nationality are living elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diego. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Diego, for that answer. I think in the interest of time, we don't have another question. But participants, I just would like to remind you that if you have another question, you can just put it on Q&A so that you can respond on that. So now we are going to take a 10 minutes break. It's now 3:36 Addis time. I think it's 12:36 Tunis time. So we are going to take a 10 minutes break. So let's resume at exactly 3:45 Addis time. Thank you. Yeah. One second. Sorry? Nini wanatupea? Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, from wherever you are. I think you had a nice break. Now in this session, welcome back. I'd like to check whether we have Lorenza with us.
Yes. Hi.
Lorenza?
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. So our next session, we are going to look at, that is on module 2, standardizing questions for identifying refugees and IDPs, that is IDPs. So our presenter for this session will be Lorenza Rossi. She is the Regional Data and Research Coordinator from International Organization for Migration, that is IOM. Ms. Lorenza, please welcome. You have the floor. Thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, and thanks, Brian, for introducing me. I'm based at the regional office of IOM in Cairo for North Africa and the Middle East. And also Aina Satre, who will join me on this presentation. So I will let her introduce herself now, if she's online.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for the introduction, Lorenza, and I'm very pleased to be here doing a co-presentation with IOM. My name is Aina Satre. I'm based in UNHCR, but I'm also the senior coordinator for the expert group on refugee and IDP statistics. Thank you.
Okay, so we start with the outline of the presentation. So we will start today with a brief introduction, just a refresher on the international frameworks that address IDPs and refugees. Then we will go through the establishment of the expert group and refugees and IDP statistic, EGRIS, that Aina just introduced. And we will look at the major output of these or product of these groups so far, or the international recommendations on refugees and IDP statistics, the RRS and the IRIS. And then we will go through the recommendation to improve census data on IDPs and refugees, touching briefly on surveys as well, and some key takeaways on the use of these two data sources for collecting data on IDPs and refugees. And we close the session with the next step of the EGRIS group and what the group will focus on in its third phase of implementation. Next, please. So just to introduce the topic and why are we talking about identifying IDPs and refugees. Well, first of all, just to give you a few figures, the numbers of refugees and IDPs has been growing in the past 30 years. In particular, the last report of the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, the GRID, just released last month, I think, counts 55 million IDPs compared to about 20 million in the 90s. Also UNHCR statistics on refugees and asylum seekers count about 27 million, also from about 20 in the 90s. And this is more so relevant in Africa, because if we look at the proportion or the percentage of international migrants in Africa, they're about 10% of the international migrants, whereas 25% of all IDPs worldwide are in Africa and 25% of all refugees worldwide are in Africa. So Africa hosts a good share of these two populations. And so these estimates or estimates of this population are increasingly relevant for official statistics, which need to take account of forcibly displaced population in a consistent manner. And this is done both for internal purposes because incomplete or inadequate statistics on displaced population undermine the estimation of population stocks, which in turn affects other statistics, particularly those measured in per capita terms, but also for monitoring international commitments like the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the SDGs, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Nansen Initiative, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. This is just to name a few. So there is a growing understanding of the importance of a harmonized statistical framework on these population groups that would strengthen or ensure the collection of complete, accurate, timely, and comparable statistics within countries, between the different data sources or the data collected by the statistical system, and also between countries and international agencies. In fact, these data are not official statistics yet, and they are in many instances collected by the international organization, refugees, for example, by UNHCR or Eurostat. And so these international agencies collect data on behalf of countries. And this shows also lack of consistency or comparability of data at international level. So growing understanding, and there is also the acknowledgement that all data sources, including population census, surveys, and administrative sources, should be leveraged to obtain such statistics. Next, please. So just to go briefly through the main framework of reference that define or that address and define these population groups, we start with the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocol. So these are the main documents that introduce and talk about refugees. And they clarify the rights of refugees and the obligation of the states that are party to one or both of these instruments. And this document clearly spell out who is a refugee and the kind of legal protection, other assistance and rights that a refugee is entitled to receive. And it also defines the refugee obligation to host countries. Initially, the 1951 convention was limited more or less to protecting European refugees in the aftermath of World War II. And the 1967 protocol expanded its scope as the problem of forced displacement spread around the world. The next document, the Guiding Principle on Internal Displacement, is made of 30 standards that outline the protections available to internally displaced people, referred to as IDPs, and they detail the rights and guarantees relevant to the protection of this group from forced displacement, and also their protection and assistance during displacement up until the achievement of durable solution. The third document is the African Union Convention for the Protection and Assistance of IDP in Africa, that is widely known as the Kampala Convention, adopted in 2009, and it expands, among other details, it also expands the protection mandate to international community.
I apologize, Lorenza, it's Aina. Yeah. Maybe I can just ask the organizers to move the slides, because I think we're lagging one slide behind.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, yes, next slide, please. The slide with the 4 framework, the picture of the 4 documents. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. No. The one before? Yes, this one. The one with the 4 documents? Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So basically we mentioned the first document, the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocols. The second is the Guiding Principle of Internal Displacement. The third one is the Kampala Convention, or the African Union Convention for IDPs. And the last one, which we will not go into details today because that's a whole it's a whole other subject, but just to leave it here, is the IASC framework for durable solution that was endorsed in 2009 by the United Nations Human Rights Commission. And the document defines the conditions that apply to the end of displacement or the end of displacement-related vulnerabilities and needs. So the framework defines that a durable solution is achieved when IDPs no longer have specific assistance and protection needs that are linked to their displacement, and such persons can enjoy their human rights without discrimination resulting from their displacement. The durable solution framework further outlines 3 routes to durable solution, which IDPs have the rights to choose from, and that they have no inherent hierarchy among them. And these 3 routes to durable solutions are sustainable reintegration at the place of origin, called return, sustainable local integration in areas where IDPs take refuge, and this is local integration, and sustainable integration in another part of the country, and this is settlement elsewhere in the country. Now, just to mention that, for example, the last 2 documents that were produced on the Global Compact for Migration and the Global Compact for Refugees, unfortunately, do not address internally displaced specifically. So there is definitely the need to fill this gap. Next, please. So this is just to see what are the definitions of these 3 population groups. So the first one, and you can tap and you will see the definitions appearing. So internally displaced persons are, you can click one time, please, on the slide. Thank you. So IDPs, these are persons who have been forced to flee or to leave their place of habitual residence, in particular as a result or in order to avoid the effects of armed conflict, situation of generalized violence, violation of human rights, or natural or human-made disasters, and who have not crossed an international border. And this comes from the guiding principles. So the 2 characteristics of internally displaced people are the forced nature of the movement and the not having crossed an international border, as opposed to refugees. Can you click one more, please? So we see the definition of refugees. Thanks. So refugees are persons who are outside their country of nationality or habitual residence, has a well-founded fear of being persecuted because of the race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular group, or political opinion, and are unable or unwilling to avail themselves of the protection of their own country or to return for fear of persecution. And this comes from the Refugee Convention. And then we have the asylum seekers. If you click again, thank you. Asylum seekers are those who have applied for the rights to be recognized as refugee and receive legal protection and material assistance from another country, and they rely on the laws of that country. Next, please. So why are we talking about this? Because existing frameworks or recommendation on vital statistics of population and housing censuses or international migration statistics do not include these population categories, with some exceptions. And IDPs and refugee data are mostly collected by international actors, namely UNHCR for refugees and IOM and UNHCR for and others for IDPs. And so most of the statistics or the data that exists on this population group are what we call operational data rather than official statistics. And there are a range of national and international practice that have been devised to translate this international definition into measurable statistical concepts. But this translates into ad hoc interpretation most of the times that do not allow international comparison or also comparison inside the country when different data producing body collect data on these population groups. especially because they mainly they could be registered as administrative statistics. And so the UN Statistics Commission has expressed the need for using an internationally agreed statistical framework for these populations and define clearly who are these people. And also the UN Statistics Commission has also expressed the need for a program of capacity building to support member states in improving the quality and availability of statistics on forced displaced populations. It has invited all international and regional organizations to support member states. I will give the floor now to Aina, and next slide, please, to talk about this recommendation of the UN Statistics Commission. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Lorenzo, for providing the background and also some of the history. So to respond to some of the identified challenges and gaps, the UN Statistical Commission created in 2016 the expert group on refugee and IDP statistics. The original mandate from the Commission was for the group to develop international recommendations on refugee statistics. As been mentioned earlier, this was not existing at the time. As you know, we have international recommendations in many other areas. Diego has already talked about migration statistics. We have for census, we have for energy, we have for many areas, but in this particular area on forced displacement, there was none. Equally, the group was tasked with the development of a technical report on statistics of IDPs. So not recommendations per se, but more a stock taking of the situation of IDP data, IDPs being internally displaced people. This was all submitted to the Commission in 2016 and endorsed by the UN member states. Then in the same Commission, the mandate was extended to also develop international recommendations on IDP statistics. So building on the experience in the development of the refugee statistics recommendations, but also the lessons learned from development of the technical report, the group developed international recommendations on IDP statistics, as well as a compiler's manual, which is more the hands-on guidance on how to implement the recommendations. The IDP recommendations were endorsed by the UN Statistical Commission in 2020. So as of today, we have now approved and endorsed recommendations in both areas. The compiler's manual was taken notice of, and also there was some guidance from the Commission on how to improve the compiler's manual, and this work is now ongoing as part of phase 3 of the expert group. I'll talk a bit more about the phase 3 and what's currently in process there now a bit later, sorry. But just to quickly show you the timeline, the work goes back to 2015, and we're now 2021, and we still have a very active and motivated group in the IGRIS. Next slide, please. This is an overview of our members, and with a special focus on your region. In total, we count 45 countries covering all regions of the world, 25 regional and international organizations. You see a list of the countries from Africa listed here. I'm not going to go too much into details, but just to mention that we have members from national statistical offices, but also from other actors or producer of statistics in the national statistical systems in country. In addition, we also work with regional organizations. We have a regional organization participating in the group from Europe. Eurostat is a member, RIASO is a member, but we have also a number of active members from your continent, and very pleased to have African Union as a steering committee member of the IGRIS group. In addition, we have the African Development Bank, we have UNECA, and we have UNESCO, to mention some. They've also embarked on some fruitful collaboration with IGAD. I heard Diego also mentioning their collaboration with the IGAD, and had a training with the colleagues from that region recently, facilitated and supported also by Statafric and Statistics Sweden, as well as DIMDAC. From the global level and international organization, we have a number of actors. I'll mention some. We have IOM, the joint data center between UNHCR and World Bank, OECD, GIPS, IDMC, UNFPA, UNICEF, UNHCR, World Bank, World Food Programme, UNRWA, and also the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Like the BBC.
Next slide, please. Before I'm giving the word back to Lorenza, just wanting to mention the strong encouragement and support we, as the IGRIS, received from the African Union in the last committee meeting of Director Generals from national statistical offices back in, time flies. I think actually it was 2019, where it says that the outcome document from the meeting invites AU member states to volunteer to participate in the expert group on refugee and internally displaced person statistics. So just to end on a note saying that the group is very open, inclusive, please reach out there if there is an interest from any of you in joining the expert group on refugee and IDP statistics. Over to you, Lorenza.
Thank you, Aina. Okay, so next slide, please. So the two documents that Aina mentioned, the International Recommendation on IDP statistics and on refugee statistics, you can see the cover page there in the slide. They go through various chapters and topics. The first is the creation of a statistical framework that standardize relevant terminology and classifications. Then there are a list of basic data tabulation and indicators. Then there is an assessment. There are assessments of data sources, including census and methods and way to improve these data sources for the collection of these particular population data on these particular population groups. There is also a section on identification of socioeconomic indicators, especially for refugee integration and also for the measurement of progress towards durable solution. There are a list of recommended SDGs that can be disaggregated by forced displacement and IDPs and refugee status, IDPs and refugees. And then there are steps to improve the statistical coordination at national, regional, and international level. Now, if you click twice on the slide, please, this highlights the area 1 and 3. If you can click twice on the slide, please. And these are the topics that we will cover today. So the statistical framework, we will go briefly through the statistical framework for these two population groups, and also another click, please, the assessment of data sources, in particular censuses. As Aina was saying, IGRIS has also developed a compiler's manual, which is more like a tool with practical guidance on implementation, and it's still being refined. And yes, at the end of the presentation, there will be a bit more details on what are the areas under refinement of the compiler's manual. Next, please. So basically, one of the main issue is that the definition of IDPs in the guide in principle is not a legal definition. So it's not used to identify a category of person of concern, like in the case of refugees, but rather to bring visibility to the potential risks, needs, and vulnerabilities of IDPs. And so it provides a framework to identify this population. Next slide, please. So this is the statistical framework for identifying.
The pairing process requires operation of a Bluetooth phone. For proper system function,
I hear a voice. Sorry. Oh. Okay, sorry, there was a sound. Can you hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
Lorenza, I can hear you very well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So this is the framework for defining refugee and refugee-related population groups. So if you see, there are in the dark orange, there are the three main categories, which are the persons in need of international protections, persons with a refugee background, and returned after having seeking international protection. And if you now click twice, please, on the slide, the asylum seekers and refugees that fall under the persons in need of international protection are the main object, let's say, of this framework, of this document, although all the others are addressed, but these are the priority groups. So it is recommended that national and international statistical systems follow the framework and the statistical definition provided in the recommendation for the production of official statistics. Next, please. The following one, next slide, please, is the framework for defining IDPs and IDP-related population groups. And you see it describes the different categories of people included. And in the top part of the graph, you see the total stock of IDPs today. We're not going into stocks and flows. This is not the subject of this presentation, but on the top there is the framework for identifying the stock of IDPs. And as we were talking about durable solutions, it is also subdivided into IDPs in 3 locations. So the IDPs can be identified in the location of displacement, in the location of returns, and in another location. And then you see below there are children born of IDPs or IDPs related groups. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yes, so these, I won't read all of these. I mean, you can read it. It's just a list of the classificatory variables, but these are the the variables that are recommended for collecting and compiling IDP statistics. And some, of course, overlap with the questions for identifying internal and internal migrants. But you see that there is in particular G, that is the main reason for initial displacement, and also the main reason for the most recent forced displacement, with the reasons. This is definitely an addition. And then on the right side of the slide, you will see some other important information that characterize this type of population. Is the type of habitation, because frequently these population groups reside in camps, IDP camps or settlements, although they can also live in communities, and actually worldwide the vast majority of IDPs do live in communities, not in camps. Next, please. These slides highlights the classificatory variables that are instead recommended for collecting and compiling refugee statistics. So again, some coincide with the information already that it was very good that Diego went all these classificatory variables before, so you can see that there is a lot of overlap with these identificatory variables, except the reason for migration or for movement. And then we go to the next slide. And this slide, as you see, represent the three groups that were in the dark orange in the framework. So the persons in need of international protection, the person with a refugee background, and the person returned from abroad after seeking international protection. And so these are the classificatory variables for all these three subgroups of refugee population and refugee-related populations. Next, please. So how do what do the recommendations say for identifying this population group in census and household surveys? In particular for IDPs, as you've seen from the framework, it is very complex to try to identify or to give a statistical definition of IDPs. And so there is the need to simplify the definition to arrive at a workable sequence of questions in surveys and census. Now, these are defined very much, with a lot of details in the IRRS, the recommendation for refugees. And so what is described in the IRIS, the one on IDPs, draws mainly on what is described in the one on refugees. Some countries or regions like UNITE have incorporated question on internal displacement in their censuses, but in most censuses it's not possible yet to identify IDPs and refugees as a separate group for data analysis. So let's look at what are these main recommendations, although these are two very rich documents that, of course, we encourage you to read. To familiarize yourself with the challenges also when trying to measure these population groups. Next slide, please. So taking from, again, building on what Diego was saying before, the UN Principal Recommendation for Population and Housing Census Revision number 3 do not include questions for identifying IDPs among the recommended core topics. However, there are 6 questions that already help in identifying that are core questions that are meant to identify geographical and internal migration characteristics, and these are the place of usual residence, the place present at the time of census, the place of birth, the duration of residence, the place of previous residence, and the place of previous residence at a specified date in the past. Now, in addition to, can you click once on the slide, please? So one easy way to identify forced displacement in census is to add the question for the reason on the move and add forced displacement as an answer. However, this will, I'm not going into details, but this will miss a share of this population. Imagine, for example, somebody that has been, just to give you one example, somebody, a Syrian migrant worker that went to work in Iraq, was a migrant worker, so his reason for the move was labor, migration, and then ISIS happened, and so they were forced to flee. So IDPs can also be international migrants. I mean, not necessarily national of the country in question. And so, if asked, the last move would be forced, but the previous move would not be forced. So there is actually the need of a lot of questions or a migration history to identify the specific reason and if it qualifies as forced displacement of every single move. And but this is a good compromise, adding just the reason for the move. Next slide, please. Otherwise, if there is space, but we are mindful that censuses are already very rich in questions, and that every item has to undergo a cost-benefit analysis. But these are the questions that you see in these slides that are identified in the IRIS, so on IDP statistics, as a minimum set of identification questions in addition to the ones that you saw on the previous slide. So have you ever been forced or obliged to flee? Yes, when was that? Where did you move from? Or where did you reside before you were forcibly displaced? And where did you move, within country borders or abroad? So again, this is recommended, but if this is not possible, at least, can you click once, please? Oh, there's something not showing, no problem. If this is not possible, then add one question on the reason for the move with forced displacement given as an answer option. Now we go on identification of refugees in censuses. Now, these questions are already in census A, B, C, D. In addition, again, it is recommended to include as a core question the reason for migration. And under answer number 4, you will see forced displacement, which includes the categories of refugees, asylum seekers, temporary protection status, and the others, and others. And you see that according to the statistical framework that you were looking at before, the categories of refugees and asylum seekers, for example, fall under the persons in need of international protection. So the topic reason for migration should really be included and should refer to the main reason that drove the responses. So it's been agreed to only add the main reason, or the main reason, so only one reason, and of the most recent migratory move. But imagine the example I gave before, and if that was the other way around, you would have the last move as labor migration, but you would not have the first move as forced displacement. So again, without a proper migration history, it's challenging to identify completely this population group. Next slide, please. Now, for what concerns surveys, the IRIS, or the recommendation IDP statistics, does not provide suggestion for the time being, although there is a working group that is tasked with that, and this would be a bit, maybe Aina will talk about this at the end, in the current work of EGRIS. Also, one important issue is how to identify a sampling frame for this population group. The identification of IDPs in censuses with the questions that we've seen in the previous slides, and as recommended by the IRIS, only allows to identify basically a sort of prevalence of IDPs. So those who have been an IDP at least once in their lifetime. But it doesn't say anything about who is an IDP now, because that is linked to having achieved a durable solution, which is the 4th document that I showed at the beginning, and I said that we wouldn't go through that, because that is also being defined now through EGRIS, or thanks to the work of EGRIS. So identifying a sampling frame remains a challenge, and providing a sampling frame of who is an IDP now will not be provided, will not be done through a census, even if if all the questions recommended are answered, because the objective is just to identify who has been an IDP at least once in its lifetime. So the current draft of the compiler's manual, which is the one that is being refined, let's say, mentions, for the time being, just mentions some case studies or examples. But in particular, in the studies that have been taken as example, as case studies, there are cases of self-identification. For example, I've put here on the slide an example in Cameroon. And then there are cases where there is no identification needed because the sample is drawn directly from an IDP population. So this is the case for operational statistics that provide, like, for example, the data that IOM collects through this displacement tracking that collect information on displaced population. So if that is used as a sampling frame, there would be no need to re-identify the population because that's already, let's say, some proxy of stock figures for internally displaced. Now, the IRIS, although it doesn't provide suggestions for the time being, this discourages strongly the use of self-identification for IDPs. And so anyway, there is work ongoing on that, so stay tuned. Next slide, please. So this is for identifying refugees in national service, and these are the same questions that are suggested for censuses. Again, the topic reason for migration should refer to the main reason and to the most recent migratory move. Next slide, please. And I think we come to some sort of wrap up or key takeaways or recommendation from this brief summary of these two recommendations that are, again, very rich documents. And so they would require a school on its own to be described in details. So there are recommendations to include or we are encouraging, or EGRIS is encouraging to include in censuses the three core migration topics, like the country of birth, citizenship, and year or period of arrival, and the reason of migration with one response for forced displacement. Then a question on current residence is usually already included in all censuses, and that can be used in combination with the above question to identify movement and current situation. But again, it will not be able to identify current IDPs because of the durable solution framework. We recommend, EGRIS also recommend to include in the to ensure that in the sampling frame, everybody is included, and this was built on also what Diego was saying about censuses, that they need to be representative of everybody and not include anyone. So include persons living in refugee camps, IDP camps, reception centers, temporary structures, so that every population can be actually included. And of course, this is for triangulation, also use other data sources. Be mindful of the different definitions or legal provisions in each country that may account for differences. And then so this is, I will close this, and I will here and leave the closing of the session to Aina. Over to you, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Lorenza, for a very detailed presentation of the recommendations from the expert group. If you could please move to the next slide, I'll take you to a bit where we are with the work now, recognizing that, okay, we have the recommendations developed and endorsed by the UN member states. What now? We are in a phase 3 of the work, and as Lorenza said initially in her presentation, the UN Statistical Commission also recommended that the EGRIS support national partners upon request in the implementation of the recommendations as well. So it's in this phase of implementation and really working on refining the recommendations as well as the compiler's manual that we are now. The group has decided to take the work forward along 3 different work streams, and we have been very fortunate to also receive some funding from the EU to take the work forward, which also makes it possible for the expert groups to provide some hands-on technical support and capacity building activities. But before moving too much into that, I just wanted to let the group know that we have 3 working groups going forward. And I think it's also related to some of the points that Diego mentioned in his presentation, areas that are important. We have 1 work stream around dissemination and promotion of the recommendations, but also of the compiler's manual. We have also development of guidance and strategic thinking around how to disseminate and how to promote the work. And then there is a second working group that is all about the implementation and also building and strengthening the statistical capacity of national statistical partners, NSO, but also wider. We're also thinking a lot of work with regional level, and some of the collaboration that I alluded to earlier will be important also going forward. And of course, with international partners in the capacity building work. We are currently, of course, limited to doing all these activities virtually. So this is one example of what we do, these webinars. But we are also planning to do regional level workshops in close collaboration with regional level partners in the IGRIS. We are working on an e-learning program that will touch upon all the central elements of the recommendations, together with the UN Training Center, and this will be available as a free resource to everyone. In addition, of course, setting up a more hands-on technical support mechanism, where countries, through a more formal request mechanism, will be able to ask for support from technical expertise in the IGRIS. We're seeing this as an opportunity for getting or source expertise from the expert group, but also for peer-to-peer learning between countries in the group, but also wider. The last group, and also the one that maybe has the most attention at the moment, is some of the work that we've discussed around the compiler's manual, which is the practical guidance of how to implement the recommendations. And this is where some of the refinements around measurements, SDG disaggregation, gender disaggregation, sampling, the solution measure that has been mentioned several times by Lorenza, also how to identify force displaced in surveys and censuses. We're working quite concretely around developing questions and modules that can support identification. Also discussions and work around a progress measure. I'm not going to go too much into details on the work, but of course this is where some of the meat really lies, and also some of the important progress needed to take this work forward. So we're doing testing of the already recommended indicators or criteria in the document. So if you look up the international recommendations on IDP statistics, you will see a list of criteria there and sub-criteria. And as we speak, we're actually doing some testing and also experimenting with those indicators to see how that how they fit reality, so to speak. So exciting, but also challenging work, and I hope there will be an opportunity to come back to this group and report on the progress in that area in the not so distant future. Going forward, as I said, it's important for us to work with this group, but also other groups. We are just out of a regional workshop with the SICA countries, so Centro-Stad in Latin America organizing a regional workshop for their region. We're hoping to do more regional workshops for other regions in Africa. A concrete follow-up for you as participants in this call would be to reach out to the IGRIS to make sure that your country is a member, or at least explore if you would like to become a member. If you're planning a census, please also get in touch and see how we can support you in including those identification questions that Lorenza presented. UNFPA is also a big player in this work, so we'll also be getting support from them. And as I mentioned, there is this possibility to get some more hands-on technical support and also access to capacity building programs as we go forward. And as a last thing, just wanting to piggyback on something that was mentioned in Diego's presentation. We are also currently working on a set of international recommendations on statelessness statistics, recognizing that this is also a group that often is invisible in official statistics. And of course, pleased to hear the recommendations from Diego to include identification of this group in censuses. And we're building on that recommendation and other in the development of the IROS. And we will hopefully be able to share this with the UN Statistical Commission in 2023. So that's work in progress. On that note, unless Lorenza, you have some last few words that you would like to pass to the group, I'm sure there are questions for us, so we are ready to take those now.
Thank you, Ina. No, I have nothing to add to what you say, except just really an encouragement to countries to reach out to IGRIS and yeah, over.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lorenza and Aina, for the wonderful presentation that you've shared with us and together with the participants on this call. It was really nice to hear about the recommendations on refugees, IDPs, and asylum seekers, and how best we can do to identify them and the type of questions to include in the censuses so that we can have these populations counted. So quickly, I want to check with Kenza whether we have any questions
Yes.
to answer for Lorenza and Aina. Yeah, Kenza?
Yes, thank you very much, Brian, and thank you very much, Lorenza and Aina. Those were very interesting concepts that you explained. So when it comes to the questions, there was one particular question that I actually already translated into Arabic to make sure that from Arabic, into English to make sure that everybody also has access to it. So it was how to measure irregular migration. And we also had another comment a comment actually, great presentations, Lorenza and Aina. In Djibouti, we are currently working on the preparation of the next population and housing census, and we would like to exchange with IGRIS with regards to the possibility of including the identification questions. Let me know how we could reach out. Thank you. So this is from Instad Djibouti, more specifically, Mr. Omar M. Ali. And so far, yes, so these were the main questions. However, if we get more questions as we go, I will make sure to follow up with the presenters so that we could also respond to your questions. Thank you very much. So Lorenza and Aina, over to you.
And I think you can respond on how to reach out the Secretariat of EGRIS, or?
Yeah, thank you for the interest. I think we have a last slide with contact information. So I think we should put that up as the last thing we do before we leave. And then please contact the Secretariat, which is the email you see there. And then we will follow up with more information on the different avenues for support, because there is more general support. There is also a more specific request mechanism if there is need for more technical support. But really pleased to see that Djibouti is considering inclusion of forced displacement in their next census. Over.
Thank you. Thank you, Aina, for that feedback. And there is this other question that was raised: how to measure regular migration. I don't know whether it's Lorenza or Aina who will respond to
that. Well, I don't think that the recommendations, unfortunately, do not address this population group. So,
yeah. No, the irregular migration is not covered in the recommendations.
Thank you. Perhaps I don't know whether we have another question for our presenters today. That is the first presenter, that is Diego, and also Lorenza and Aina.
Yes, Brian. So we had a couple of questions to Diego, and I see that he has already answered them on the Q&A bar. I can perhaps read them and then answer them also, so that other participants might benefit also from these questions. So there was, so I'm going to read them in French as they came in French, and then the translation will back me up in English or in Arabic, whether you are following this in Arabic or in English. So here I go. En RDC, on observe une forte migration de la main-d'œuvre du côté sud-est et nord-est, où l'on observe des migrants travaillant dans les mines. Et dans la partie ouest du pays, particulièrement à Kinshasa, ce sont plutôt la communauté ouest-africaine, donc entre parenthèses maliens, sénégalais, qui œuvrent dans le commerce des vêtements, les Camerounais et les Nigérians dans le commerce des pièces de rechange pour automobiles et autres. Ma question: doit-on obtenir les informations sur tous ces migrants dans les endroits où ils exercent ou dans leur ménage? La crainte est que plusieurs sont sans papier. Quelles sont les stratégies pour obtenir toutes ces informations? Alors, Diego a répondu en disant: nous devrions capturer ces migrants à l'endroit où ils résident, qu'ils soient documentés ou non. Cela ne devrait pas être la préoccupation du recensement, qu'ils soient documentés ou non. Donc, voilà. Il y avait une autre question que je vois, Aina, à laquelle Aina a répondu. Et donc là, je vais passer à l'anglais vu que la question a été en anglais. Any comment on repatriation and deported populations for the purpose of classification and statistics? And so Aina responded, in the statistical framework, we have persons returned from abroad after having sought international protection, including repatriating refugees. meaning persons likely to be citizens who have returned to their home country after having enjoyed asylum abroad. Both refugees returning under internationally assisted repatriation programs and those returning spontaneously should be included in this category. So if Aina and Lorenza would like to add perhaps anything on these points or would like to explain further, please feel free to jump in. Yeah, thank you very much. And I also see someone who raised their hand. Perhaps if they could put a comment in the chat section or Q&A section, and we'll be more than happy to assist them. Thank you very much. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Kenza, for the support and for also reading out the questions to us. For Kenza, sorry, for Lorenza and Aina, I think in the interest of time, I'd request that we reach out to the participants on the call. Maybe you can give a few minutes, you can respond to them, and also maybe in our later sessions, you can also interact with them because we have taken longer than even we had planned. And I would like to offer much appreciation to our participants for staying on the call for this long. So again, much appreciation to our presenters today, Diego, Lorenza, and Aina, for the wonderful presentations that you've had for us regarding population and housing censuses, and also the standardized questions for identifying refugees and IDPs. So tomorrow's session will have two modules, but 3 sessions. Our sessions on estimation methods. That is sessions on estimation methods, and where we look at the examples of good practices. And also another session we'll have on Leave No Migrant Behind, that is in terms of data disaggregation and the SDGs. So to our participants, also tomorrow, these are the sessions that you have, and you are all welcome for the next session tomorrow. Same time, we'll start as today, that is 11 GMT. Don't forget about that. But before I close the meeting, perhaps, Madam Leila, do you have any message for our participants?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for all speakers for this information shared to the participants related to the census and also for the recommendation and of EGRIS. Let us meet tomorrow. I want to call all the participants to join us tomorrow to also participate in the session, because tomorrow it's more technical and we will get more information related to the disaggregation and the estimation of migration data and statistical migration statistics. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Madam Leila, for that. So to our participants, thank you. You're welcome to see you tomorrow. And also do remember that these sessions should be very interactive. So your questions and any other concerns are welcome. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening or good afternoon from wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Bye.